Hi everyone. Should we get started? Let's get started. Welcome to this evening's concert. We've never had back-to-back Houston concerts before, so this is a new thing this year. I love it. It's great to see everybody again so soon. We're going to open tonight with another duet, this time Paul Wianco's American Haiku for cello and viola. Paul was born in 1983. He is a truly exceptional cellist, arranger, recording engineer, and composer who has written chamber works for a lot of today's prominent younger quartets. He's also been commissioned by a lot of chamber music festivals across the US. He began studying cello at age 5 and composing at 8. He described himself as a serial chamber musician. And he's collaborated with a lot of our country's large chamber ensembles, like 8th Blackbird, East Coast Chamber Orchestra, Roomful of Teeth, and many others. He's also had really close working partnerships with the jazz legend Chick Corea, Nora Jones, Etta James, and was previously a member of the Harlem String Quartet in New York. Paul became the cellist of the uniquely revered Kronos Quartet in 2023, after playing as a guest cellist for some programs and previously writing a piece for their 50th anniversary project. It was something called 50 for the Future. So for 5 years, so from years 45 to 50 of Kronos Quartet, they had 10 pieces commissioned per year by both established and newer composers. And the purpose of the project was for them to play those pieces, but also to help create them as teaching tools to give other string players the skills that they would need for performing 21st century string quartets. So each composition is online and it has an instructional video and interviews and insights from the composers, and then these high quality recordings of Kronos playing these 50 pieces. So if you just love contemporary string quartets, they're all there free online if you want to take a listen. And then eventually Paul was playing on some of these recordings, even though he started out as one of their composers. So our duo tonight premiered in 2014, and it incorporates Appalachian fiddling, some percussive patterns, especially in the cello, and Japanese folk melodies. Paul is a Japanese American, and he fell in love with the poetic form, the haiku, the 5-7-5 syllables, from his family. His father was a filmmaker, and so for him, the visual aspect of the haiku was really compelling. He was always looking for new ways to translate the characters, because I guess in Japanese the characters can have more than one meaning, and so that would change what the poem means. And so I think that was very visually compelling to him since he was a filmmaker. And so he went out and tried to find somebody that could help him better translate these haikus, and it turns out that he found somebody, and then that became his wife and Paul's mother. So that's also like a nice connection there. So as Paul further investigated his Japanese heritage, he realized that he had a special love for the sparse texture and delicate nature of his culture's folk music, but he also was really drawn to the kind of earthy, rooted folk music of Appalachia. So this piece is Paul merging those vastly different aesthetics that meet their shared descriptions of the natural world. In many ways, American Haiku is Paul's very brief treatise on his own life, his journey into his roots, which I think is like a very American idea, right? To try to like meld the different parts of you to create something new. It's a piece that's in 3 movements. Each brings some percussive rhythms coupled with rich, kind of spacious chords. You can hear the mountains or the open space in there, and a lot of kind of plucky melodies. The blending of viola and cello, I think, plays a crucial role in why this piece really works, because we have an overlapping range, and like the texture of our instrument, shares a lot in common. And so I have kind of a lot of the neat percussion stuff too. Wianco wrote American Haiku shortly after the extended collaboration he had with the jazz musician Chick Corea, and Paul considers him one of his most important influences. For all of his classical training, it was working in jazz that really solidified kind of his voice as a composer, and he credits the time with Korea as the most influential part of his young compositional career. In a few interview that I read from a few years ago, he said, American haiku is a bit of a mess stylistically. It bounces everywhere between all of these different flavors and is just kind of loosely held together by the harmony, and just the fact that it's a duo for viola and cello makes it unique right from the start. So we hope you enjoy our little opener. It's about 9 minutes. And then we're going to move on to the string trio of Australian composer Miriam Hyde. Miriam was born in 1913 in Adelaide. Her first teacher, like many composers, was her mother, who was a professional pianist. And her father spent his entire working life working for a steamship company. So they were not a wealthy family, but Miriam's parents worked very hard to provide a very loving, kind of gentle musical education for their daughters, and really made the most of every opportunity to encourage the girls to, work hard at music and see where it takes them. So by her mid-teens, Miriam was making her first broadcast debuts on Australian Broadcasting Company. She made that debut at 16, playing the Chopin E minor concerto with the Melbourne Symphony. And by the time she was an adult, she was already very experienced as a recitalist and a concerto soloist, both on the radio and in live concerts. And composition was already a big part of her life as a teenager, in tandem with all of the piano practicing she was doing. So she won a scholarship to the Royal College of Music in London, which is where we know that she wrote the short trio that we're going to play today. It's about 15 minutes. As far as we know, the trio was never performed in public until it received some attention following her death in 2005. It's a 4-movement work. It's not terribly modern for 1932, the year in which it was written, but it's full of elegance, tuneful melodies, and a really lovely interplay between the 3 parts. Miriam studied piano and composition with her fellow Australian-born musician friend Arthur Benjamin. She had initially gone to London hoping to study with Vaughan Williams, wouldn't we all? But she received a very fine education nonetheless. She won 3 composition prizes and soloed with several of London's orchestras, including the BBC Orchestra, playing 2 of her own piano concertos. And then her London Symphony debut followed closely at age 22, again playing her own 2nd piano concerto. And she would go on to perform both her works and others with every Australian major orchestra. Need more water. Returning to Adelaide in South Australia's centenary year, which was 1936, Hyde wrote much of the orchestral music for all of the celebrations associated with the centennial. And shortly after that, she took her former teacher, Arthur Benjamin's advice, and moved to Sydney for most of the remainder of her life. He thought she would have more opportunities there. So one exception to this was during the Second World War. She briefly moved back to Adelaide to have the support of her family during that time. As soon as the war had been declared, her very recent husband, I'm talking like weeks, had enlisted in the military. So after a 4-day honeymoon, he left for active duty. He was stationed in North Africa and later Greece, and then eventually came to Europe. He was captured and imprisoned as a POW. And for many, many weeks, all she knew was that he was missing. So the anguish of not knowing if her husband was dead or alive weighed on Hyde for years, a situation that was endured by many people of that time. Marcus had been captured by the Germans, so at least she knew he was alive, but it took 5 years before there was confirmed word that he was safe and had been released and made his way back to London. So I don't know, 5 years is an awfully long time to not know where anybody is, let alone like your husband of a few weeks. So after being reunited at the end of the war, Hyde and her husband worked on establishing themselves and their family life in Sydney, very soon after having 2 children just 16 months apart. And Hyde's family life, composing, teaching, these things all went together for decades. She was very active as a composer, playing recitals, teaching, and she was also a writer. Her literary skills yielded nearly 500 poems, many inspired by her home life. She loved to write about, kind of simple things with her children or nature. But I think her writing kind of culminated in 1991. She wrote her own biography, which is called Complete Accord, which I have not read. But I guess the proceeds from that sponsored a scholarship. The scholarship that she had won to go to London, all of the proceeds from the book would go into that scholarship fund to help it, kind of pay it forward. The first of Hyde's music to be in print was a set of 5 small piano pieces. The publisher, even though this was her first, the publisher decided to print them as her Opus 12, when we know they were her Opus 1. The company believed that no one would buy an Opus 1 from an unknown female composer. Some of you have heard me speak in the past about composers like Amy Beach and Rebecca Clark, how sometimes pen names or white lies were told in order to get a woman composer on the map. So giving Miriam's piece an Opus 12 instead of an Opus 1 gave the impression that she was established and already like a good lady composer. So Miriam continued composing well into her later years and received countless awards, honorary degrees, but more than that, a deep admiration from her country. I read so many accounts of just how much Miriam Hyde means to Australian music. She revamped their kind of musical education system. She wrote a ton of music that incorporates Australian scenes and folk music. So more than all of the accolades, I was very struck by what she must mean to that country. And I was just telling everybody backstage that we don't learn a lot about Australian music in music school. And by not a lot, I mean nothing. So it's really nice to just play even this one piece and get to know her a little bit. Finally, tonight we will present Ravel's very youthful string quartet, written in 1902. This quartet owes an immense debt to the quartet of Claude Debussy, which was written 9 years prior, both in kind of surface detail, but also at deeper levels. I think without Debussy's quartet and template, Ravel's quartet would have likely been quite different. Up to this point, young Ravel had yet to write a work that was too substantial. He had written some orchestra pieces, some piano pieces, but this was one of the first pieces that kind of showed us his fuller range of vision. But it's not an imitation of Debussy. I know last night we talked about how Mozart and Joseph Boulogne may have learned from each other and imitated each other. Ravel certainly did not just copy Debussy. In fact, I love to listen to these pieces close together because you hear very clear similarities in terms of how they organize their quartets, that kind of French harmonic language mood. But there are also really big differences that we would never kind of drop the needle and you would be confused. They're very separate because Debussy, I think we still hear him holding on to German Romanticism a little bit. He's looking back, but he's also working very hard to kind of find his own voice. And he seems sometimes kind of frustrated by that in his quartet. Whereas in reality, if we're just looking at people's biographies, Ravel had a much bigger axe to grind by writing his quartet. He had been very unacknowledged by the musical establishment in Paris. Many people personally disliked him and his music. He was rejected from the prestigious Prix de Rome Prize for 5 years in a row. He was thrown out of school. Any turmoil he felt over these many, pretty substantial rejections does not show up in this quartet. It is a fully luminous work where Ravel fills every single moment of what is a very classically structured quartet with just this kind of ease. It's not easy for us, but the music is full of ease, elegance, sensuality, nature, kind of far away passions. It's just fantastic. It's one of the best quartets. So the first movement is a case in point of that. It's a textbook classical sonata form. We hear a question, we hear an answer, we hear the opening theme that comes back in all 4 movements of the quartet. It's stated very simply and very tender music at the opening. It ascends 4 bars, it comes away for 4 bars, and that keeps happening. It's almost as if Ravel is doing an exercise in how much he loves for the music to be normal. So there's kind of a hushed, kind of reclined second theme, which to me gives a little raised eyebrow to someone who might have captured your attention, or at least your attention for the moment in your Paris salon party that you're at. And And then that opening music comes back in a very kind of loving way, where Ravel kind of depicts the sun setting during the coda of that movement. And I think the magic here in this piece is that combination of the clarity on one hand and Ravel's very kind of sensuous harmonic language. And this is also amplified by the kind of incredible amount of creativity and instinct. I think it was pretty innate for him in terms of orchestration, voicings, like little textures in the strings that just create so many different shades of color, emotions, and just constantly like interesting little things to catch our ear. The second movement, much like Paul Wianco does in American Haiku, Ravel seems to turn to his family history for some inspiration. His mother was from the Basque region of Spain and grew up in Madrid. So we hear some folk guitar strumming in pizzicato and some cross rhythms where some of us are kind of playing in 2 and some of us are playing in 3, but it's at the same time. Meanwhile, his father was a really wonderful mechanic and inventor. And so I feel like we hear that in there too, because in those cross rhythms, we're hearing like a motor, you know, kind of like a little machine working in clockwork. The first movement's theme is kind of concealed in plain sight in this movement. The pitches are there in the main melody, but they're reassembled. I read something online where people likened it to cubism in art history, where it's kind of, yeah, that's kind of a tree or whatever, but but not, yeah. So the middle section of that movement is just, to me, like a straight up opium dream. The melody is super high in the cello part. There's kind of a woozy chromatic accompaniment with little snippets of previous music that just kind of appear and then they're gone. Little hallucinations maybe. And ultimately the cello brings us back to the very alert and tangible world of the main section. So again, we're hearing Ravel's love of the formal structure, just A, B, now A is back. The third movement opens with a kind of moody theme, a very classic, the viola is sad moment, which I've played so many viola is sad moments, and tonight there are many. And this recitative is stated once in the viola, then right away in the cello, then right away in the first violin. So kind of a question when we're alone at night. But the answer to this 3 times asked question is for now postponed. Instead, that scene kind of dissolves into a plaintive aria for the viola. But even in that loneliness, personally, I hear memories of kind of lovely moments between, you know, 2 friends or 2 people in a relationship where maybe they feel like together in their loneliness, like let's be lonely next to each other. And that happens between the first violin and the viola. And I find that very comforting because I think we all need that from time to time. So here again, we hear the first movement somewhere in the distance. It's kind of hovering. And then after the last of these little interjections, the cello emerges threateningly. It's intense. And then that introduces kind of a nocturnal middle section full of hurried little squirrely things. In the 2 violins and viola, it kind of suggests insects flapping about at night. There's a lot of so. And again, previous melodies keep resurfacing, but nothing is quite what it seems in the night music that Ravel has created for us. It's a little misleading. And then the viola aria returns, structure, and it's kind of like that familiar light that's guiding us home. But I do want you to notice that when my melody returns, I think it seems less lonely this time. It could be Ravel's harmony or just the way that the texture is, but it does feel, it feels a little better by the end. And the opening recitative that asked all those questions now feels answered with a full statement of the main theme of the first movement, and it just kind of goes up and up and up in pitch until it kind of evaporates into the clouds. So the finale brings the piece full circle in more sense than one. This movement, just like the first, is very elegantly proportioned. But there's a lot more turbulence, and I think that for sure comes from the fact that it's in 5/8 time. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So it puts you back on your heels a little bit. And it also starts out kind of in the wrong key, which is something that he borrowed from people like Beethoven and Schumann, because it does create that feeling of just kind of dropping the needle. Oh, this is where we are in the piece. It kind of feels like it's not the beginning when we start. So the main theme serves here kind of as a transitional character. It brings us from place to place in this movement. And when we have visitors from other movements, they kind of get overlaid with the new music that Ravel is bringing to the last movement. It's a very kind of gruff, jocular movement. And then it ends with a very euphoric coda. It's very nimble, and I don't know, it creates a lot of joy at the end for all of the kind of turmoil or angstiness in the rhythm. It does conclude in F major, happy. I don't know, maybe in celebration that Ravel knew that he created finally his first, I don't know, like full work expressing who he was as a composer. So I invite you to enjoy all of these pieces this evening, and we'll see you in a moment. Thanks.